The envelope sat like a challenge on Nathaniel Blake's sleek mahogany desk, white embossed, trimmed in gold leaf, so thin it caught the morning sun like a razor's edge. His name was handwritten in perfect cursive, Mr. Nathaniel Blake. No return address, but he didn't need one. He already knew who had sent it. He stared at it for a full minute before he touched it. Then, with fingers as steady as a storm-worn oak, he cracked the wax seal and pulled the stiff invitation free. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Sloane Kensington and Gregory Ashford. The names mocked him. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, his breath caught halfway between a scoff and a growl. Sloane, the woman who had promised him forever, was marrying another man. Not just any man, but Gregory Ashford, his longtime business rival, the man who'd spent the last 5 years trying to outbid, outplay, and outshine him. Cordially, he muttered under his breath, "That's rich." He leaned back in his leather chair, one hand running through his blonde hair, perfectly styled just moments before. He looked out at the Manhattan skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his 52nd floor office. From here, the city looked like a model, pristine, orderly, manageable. But inside Nathaniel Blake, everything felt anything but. 38, single and wealthier than most dynasties. Forbes cover twice. Net worth in the billions. A real estate empire stretching from Miami to Montreal. And yet, she'd still left. Not for lack of effort, not for lack of gifts or mansions or designer weekends in Provence. No, she left with words that had stung deeper than any betrayal. You're emotionally absent, Nate. You build skyscrapers like they'll love you back. His assistant's voice cut through the intercom. Mr. Blake, your 2-in-a-row just canceled. You have the rest of the afternoon free. Nathaniel blinked, still staring at the invitation. Thank you, Marcy, he said mechanically. Then with slow deliberation, he picked up the invitation and tossed it into the trash. Enough. 30 minutes later, Nathaniel found himself in a neighborhood he hadn't visited in years. Prospect Heights, Brooklyn. Far from the Michelin-starred eateries and velvet lounges his usual circles favored. Here the sidewalks cracked, the shops had hand-painted signs, and the air smelled of warm bread and old stories. He walked into a small cafe with foggy windows and mismatched chairs where jazz played faintly beneath the hum of conversation and clinking mugs. No one looked up. No one recognized him. Perfect. Sliding into a booth near the window, he pulled out his phone and scrolled aimlessly through headlines and emails he had no intention of reading. A voice interrupted him, warm, amused, and unbothered. Coffee black, that's bold, or just boring. Nathaniel looked up. The waitress was standing there with one hip cocked and a notepad in hand, her expression neutral but eyes sharp with curiosity. She was stunning, but not in the way Sloane or other society women had been. No curated angles, no filtered perfection. Her dark skin glowed against the soft lighting of the cafe, her curls pulled back in a loose ponytail, and her face free of makeup. She wore a name tag, Ayana. Rough day, she asked when he didn't immediately respond. He surprised himself by answering honestly. Rough month. She gave a sympathetic nod, one he somehow believed. You need something stronger than caffeine. May I recommend our chocolate chip cookies? They're warm, and I'm convinced they've saved more lives than therapy. Nathaniel huffed a short laugh. Sure, add one to the order. She paused. How about 2? I could use a cookie too. My break's in 10. He blinked, surprised. You want to join me? Ayana raised an eyebrow. You offering or just being charming in your grief? Both with. She gave him a long look, then shrugged. 10 minutes. 12 minutes later, she returned, no apron, 2 cookies in hand, and a cup of tea for herself. She slid into the booth opposite him like she belonged there, and maybe she did. So she said, taking a bite, what brings a man in a $1,000 jacket to a neighborhood cafe where lattes cost less than parking meters? He smirked. This jacket cost $4,000. Ayana snorted. See now, I know it's bad. Nobody brags about price tags unless they're trying to feel something. Nathaniel chuckled, a real one this time. Touché. She studied him for a moment, then asked plainly, let me guess. Love problems. He hesitated, then nodded. My ex is getting married. To someone I despise. I got the invitation this morning. Ayana winced. Ouch, that's cold. She said she wanted us to remain friends. Said it would be gracious if I attended. You're not going right. Nathaniel looked away. I was considering it. She stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Why? So you can watch them toast to your irrelevance? In my world, not showing up would look weak, he said quietly. Like I can't face her. Are you still in love with her? The question was so blunt it made him flinch. No one in his world would dare ask him that. No, he said after a long pause. just angry. She didn't just leave, she told the media I was emotionally distant, said I love money more than her. And was she wrong? Nathaniel looked at Ayana like he'd been slapped. No, he said slowly, I thought I was building it all for us. Turns out I was just building it for myself. Ayana sipped her tea. So you want to go to this wedding to prove something? To prove I've moved on. And how's that going? He glanced at his untouched coffee. Not well. Ayana smiled. You need a better plan. Nathaniel stared at her. Then as a thought flickered across his face, he said, What if you came with me? She nearly choked on her cookie. Excuse me, to the wedding, as my date. You can't be serious. One night, I'll pay you, of course. Ayana slammed her tea down. I'm not for hire, Mr. Fancy Jacket. No, wait, that's not what I meant. Just think of it like acting. I need someone real, someone who doesn't fit their world. Wow, she said dryly. That's a hell of a pitch. You're so out of place, you're perfect. And with that, she stood. I don't do pity gigs, she said. Good luck proving yourself to ghosts. And then she walked away, leaving Nathaniel alone with 2 cookies, one half-eaten, the other untouched, and a realization far heavier than the gold-inked invitation still lying in the trash. He had all the power in the world. But when it came to the one thing that mattered now, authentic connection, he had nothing. Nothing, except maybe a chance. And her name was Ayana. Nathaniel Blake wasn't used to being dismissed, especially not by someone who didn't know his net worth, didn't care about his boardroom accolades, and definitely didn't worship at the altar of his reputation. And yet that's exactly what Ayana Brooks had done. He had spent the rest of the day thinking about that moment, her curt goodbye, the steel in her voice, the way her back remained perfectly straight as she walked away from his table, like she was walking away from a sinking ship. That night, back in his penthouse, Nathaniel couldn't sleep. The silence was louder than it had ever been. The windows which once made him feel like he owned the sky now pressed in on him with suffocating clarity. He'd built towers out of ambition, yet somehow ended up alone on top of them. By morning, he had made a decision. He returned to the cafe with no entourage, no tailored excuse. Just coffee and something he hadn't extended in a long time, humility. Ayana spotted him the moment he walked in. Her posture stiffened, but she didn't turn away. When she reached his table, the same neutral expression painted her face professional, cool, unreadable. Back for another cookie, she asked without warmth. Nathaniel looked up, back to apologize. That threw her off balance for a second. She didn't sit, but she didn't walk away either. I realized what I said yesterday was offensive, he continued. I treated you like a prop. I'm sorry. Ayana crossed her arms. You don't seem like someone who apologizes often. I don't, he admitted, but I was wrong, and I'm trying to do better. Silence stretched between them like a taut rope. Finally, she spoke. Apology accepted. He nodded, visibly relieved. Most guys like you don't even know when they're being insulting, she added. Guys like me, he echoed. Rich, entitled, used to getting their way. He gave a tight smile. Fair. Ayana turned to go, but something in her expression softened. You want the usual, she asked over her shoulder. Yes, and another cookie, please. 10 minutes later, she brought over his coffee, along with a fresh cookie on a napkin. You look tired, Nathaniel said. She hesitated before replying. I was at the hospital until 3:00 a.m. My mom's still in recovery. His brow furrowed. How is she? Heart complications, Ayana said. She needs surgery. Insurance covers some of it, but not all. I'm sorry to hear that, he said quietly. Ayana straightened. It's fine, I'm working doubles. Nathaniel stared at his coffee, shame slowly bleeding into his expression. All his problems, the wedding, the headline Sloane's betrayal, suddenly felt so small. When Ayana turned to leave again, he stopped her. I have a new proposal, he said. She groaned, exasperated. You really don't know when to quit, do you? This one's different, Nathaniel promised. Come to the wedding with me. One night, 6 hours max. In return, I'll pay for your mother's surgery, all of it, and the rehab. The silence that followed was deafening. Ayana stared at him as if he'd spoken another language. Her jaw worked, but no sound came out for a moment. That's not funny. I'm not joking. You want to pay for my mother's life-saving surgery, just so you don't have to show up alone. It's not about not being alone, he said. It's about walking into that room with someone real, someone who doesn't belong to that world. You. Akina narrowed her eyes. Why me? You could hire an actress, a model, someone who knows how to play the part. Nathaniel's gaze didn't waver. Because you're the only person who's looked me in the eye since Sloane left and told me the truth. Because you're not impressed by my money. Because you don't pretend. She studied him for a long moment, arms still crossed. And you'd really pay for the surgery. No strings. None. A contract if you want one. Ayanna didn't answer. She just turned and walked away. He left his card on the table before leaving. 3 days passed. Nathaniel started to think he'd pushed too far again. Maybe this time there'd be no redemption. Then on the fourth day, his private line rang. Blake, he answered. It's Ayanna, the voice said. His heart did something it hadn't done in weeks. It jumped. I remember your offer, she said. Does it still stand? Yes. My mom's surgery costs around $80,000. With rehab and meds, it's closer to $100. Consider it done. There was a pause. If I do this, and I'm not saying I am, I need to know what I'm getting into. What exactly would this date involve? One evening, pretending to be my girlfriend, showing Sloan and everyone else that I'm fine. No touching, no pretending beyond that. Unless you're comfortable. I'm not that kind of guy. I want that in writing, Ayanna said. Nathaniel smiled. My lawyer will draw it up today. One more thing, she said. You need to understand something. What's that? I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for my mom. And if you ever try to make me feel like I owe you more than that, we're done. I wouldn't dream of it. Fine, she said. Then I'll do it. Nathaniel exhaled, relief flowing through him like a warm current. Thank you, he said sincerely. I'll have everything arranged by tomorrow. When the call ended, he stood in the middle of his penthouse staring out over the city. For the first time in weeks, the skyline didn't look so cold. And as crazy as it seemed, he found himself actually looking forward to the wedding. Not because of Sloan, not because of revenge, but because of the woman who had just agreed to stand by his side, if only for a night. Ayanna Brooks had said yes, and something told Nathaniel that her yes was going to change everything. Nathaniel wasn't accustomed to waiting for people, but as he stood outside Ayanna's walk-up apartment building in Crown Heights holding his phone and watching the minutes tick past 7:00 p.m., he found himself oddly nervous. Not because she was late, she wasn't. If anything, she was perfectly on time. The nerves stemmed from something deeper, something he couldn't quite name yet. He glanced down at the town car idling beside him. His driver, Martin, waited patiently behind the wheel. It was the same driver who transported foreign dignitaries, Fortune 500 execs, and once even a celebrity chef who refused to fly coach. But tonight, Nathaniel wasn't picking up a dignitary. He was picking up Ayanna. And somehow that made him more tense than any boardroom confrontation he'd ever walked into. The door opened. Ayanna stepped out wearing a navy blue coat and simple heels, her curls tucked into a wool beret. The wind tugged at her hem and she paused on the stoop when she saw him. He offered a faint smile. You clean up nice, she said as she approached. Still overdressed, but I expected that. You should see me when I'm trying, Nathaniel replied. She smirked and stepped into the car without hesitation. Once inside, the silence lingered just long enough to feel awkward. Then Ayanna turned slightly in her seat. So she said, tonight's the dress rehearsal, right? Nathaniel nodded. Exactly. We go over the backstory, cover all the details, how we met, how long we've been dating, where I took you for your birthday. Please don't say Paris. I was going to say Rome. Even worse, Ayanna said. Let's keep it believable. Fair enough. He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were printouts, photoshopped images of them together, itinerary notes, a few talking points. Ayanna raised an eyebrow. You made a dossier. You're not the only one taking this seriously. She flipped through the pages. You staged a photo of us at a charity gala. That's where we met 3 months ago. We started dating exclusively last month. We've been low-key because you value privacy. Sounds about right, she said. Because nothing says privacy like a fake girlfriend at your ex's wedding. He smiled. Exactly. They arrived at a private dining room inside one of Manhattan's lesser-known but deeply luxurious restaurants. No paparazzi, no crowds, just quiet music, candlelight, and a perfectly plated tasting menu already prepared by the chef. Ayanna sat down slowly, taking in the ambiance. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice low. I can smell the money. Nathaniel grinned. Just wait till dessert. The server poured sparkling water and vanished. You okay, he asked. Is this too much? Ayanna met his gaze. Honestly, yes, but I'm fine. I can tone it down. Too late. You already paid for my mom's surgery. The excessive dinner's just a bonus. He chuckled softly. I wasn't trying to impress you. Good, she said, because you'd fail. She didn't say it unkindly. In fact, there was a teasing glint in her eye. Nathaniel relaxed a little more. You said you used to work in education, he asked as they waited for the appetizer. I still do in my head, Ayanna replied. I have a degree in early childhood development. I just couldn't make it work. Teaching doesn't pay enough in this city, especially not when you're caring for someone. Your mother, she nodded. She raised me by herself. Took on every job she could. Now it's my turn. Nathaniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. You ever think about going back to teaching? Every day, but wishing doesn't pay the medical bills. I could. No. Ayana's voice was firm. Don't finish that sentence. This arrangement we have, one night, one favor, that's the line. You helped with my mom. I'm grateful. But I'm not becoming someone's charity case. Nathaniel nodded slowly. Understood. The first course arrived, a delicate tuna tartare served with citrus foam. Ayana stared at it like it had spoken to her in a foreign language. What is this? Expensive nonsense, he admitted. You can push it around your plate if you want. I'm a Brooklyn girl. I prefer things that come in paper bags and taste like grease. He laughed, noted. They ate in silence for a few moments. Then Ayana spoke again. What about you? You always knew you wanted to own half of Manhattan. Not at first, he replied. My mom cleaned houses for a living. Some of the biggest homes you can imagine. I used to tag along after school, sit in their studies while she scrubbed tile. Ayana blinked. I didn't expect that. No one does, he said. I remember sketching out fake floor plans while she worked. Dream houses. Spaces that felt like safety, not just status. She stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. So all of this, the empire, it started from that. I thought if I could build enough, I'd never feel small again. And did it work? Nathaniel looked away for a while. She didn't press, didn't have to. The second course arrived. Then the third. The food was beautiful but forgettable. The conversation, however, had taken on a life of its own. By dessert, a simple dark chocolate tart with sea salt, they weren't talking about the wedding anymore. They were talking about books, childhood dreams, teachers who changed their lives. Nathaniel learned Ayana loved jazz and hated mornings. Ayana learned Nathaniel had a fear of elevators ever since being trapped in one as a kid. And somewhere between the third and fourth laugh, something shifted. I'm going to be honest with you, Nathaniel said as they finished their drinks. I thought tonight would be just logistics, lines to memorize, scenes to play, and it's not. No, he said, it's better, realer. Ayana tilted her head. You realize it's still fake, right? I'm still pretending to be your girlfriend. I know, he said, but I don't feel like I'm pretending with you. A beat passed, then another. I'm not sure if that's romantic or tragic, Ayana said softly. He didn't answer. He just looked at her, and in his silence, she saw something she hadn't expected: loneliness. Not the kind that came from a breakup or a ruined ego, but the kind that came from years of being admired and never really known. I'll play the part, she said, finally pushing back her chair. I'll be the date, the +1. But if you ever forget that I'm doing this on my terms, I walk, no matter how much the venue costs. Nathaniel stood as she did, reaching for his coat. I won't forget, he promised. But for what it's worth, I don't think I'll want to. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and unseasonably warm. Sunlight streamed through the penthouse windows as Nathaniel adjusted his tie in front of the mirror fingers, betraying a rare nervousness. His custom tuxedo fit perfectly, the fabric crisp and dark against the white of his shirt. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another social event. This was a reckoning. He took one last look at himself and grabbed the small velvet box from the nightstand. Not a ring, but a pair of diamond earrings. Subtle, elegant, a gesture. He slipped them into his jacket pocket and headed to the car. Ayana stepped out of the limousine at the steps of St. Augustine's Cathedral, and for a moment time stopped. The navy blue dress she had chosen fit like it had been tailored for her. Simple floor length with a plunging neckline that was elegant rather than revealing. Her curls had been styled into a loose chignon, revealing the graceful line of her neck and the gold shimmer dusting her shoulders. Nathaniel was used to beautiful women. He dated models, actresses, women with stylists, and curated lives. But Ayana, she wasn't polished. She was radiant. You look, he started, then stopped. Stunning. She raised an eyebrow. That was dramatic. You okay? He smiled, offering his arm. Just not used to being the less interesting person in the room. Ayana smirked, slipping her arm through his. Ready to give the performance of a lifetime. Something like that. As they walked up the grand stone steps of the cathedral, Nathaniel could already feel eyes turning. He caught snippets of hushed conversation, his name whispered like an urban myth. That's Blake, isn't it, with her? Isn't that Sloane's ex? Who is she? Or Panchaman? Ayana leaned in. You look like you're walking into your own funeral. He forced a smile. Let's show them how alive I am. Inside, the space glittered with opulence. Crystal chandeliers, towering floral arrangements, and aisle runners that probably cost more than most people's rent. It was Sloane's vision to the letter, an extravagant fairy tale designed to be envied. An usher guided them purposefully to the bride's side. Ayena's grip on his arm tightened just slightly. "Is that a power move?" she murmured. "Absolutely," Nathaniel replied. "Sloane doesn't do anything by accident." As they made their way down the aisle to their assigned seats, Nathaniel nodded at familiar faces, colleagues, investors, socialites, each one assessing him with a mix of curiosity and veiled judgment. And then he saw her. Sloane stood just off to the side near the altar, giving last-minute instructions to her maid of honor. She turned and her eyes locked with Nathaniel's. She looked as flawless as ever, a walking advertisement for bridal magazines. Her platinum blonde hair was swept into a sleek updo, and her fitted white gown clung to her like a second skin. For a second, Nathaniel felt something flicker inside him. Not desire, not regret, just the echo of a life that had once seemed inevitable. Sloane's gaze shifted to Ayana. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "She saw us," he muttered. Ayana, without missing a beat, reached over and took his hand. "Then let's give her something to look at," she whispered. She leaned in close, her lips just brushing his ear as if sharing a private joke. She laughed softly, perfectly, effortlessly. Nathaniel felt the tension in his shoulders melt just a little. He smiled, a real one, for the first time that day. When the music began and the guests stood, he was no longer thinking about Sloane. He was thinking about the woman beside him whose fingers were still gently entwined with his. The ceremony was opulent, choreographed, and somehow emotionally sterile. Gregory Ashford stood at the altar like a man accepting an award, not pledging his life. Sloane floated down the aisle with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Wow," Ayana murmured. "They even make fairy tales feel like product launches." Nathaniel stifled a snort. "Careful, someone might think you're jealous." Of what she whispered back. "A performance, please, I do community theater better than this." He grinned. When the officiant reached the line, "If anyone here knows of any reason these two should not be joined," Ayana elbowed Nathaniel gently. "Don't even think about it," she whispered. "Wouldn't dream of it," he said, and this time he meant it. After the ceremony, the guests made their way to the Plaza Hotel for the reception. The grand ballroom was transformed into a scene from a dream. White and gold dominated everything, flowers, chandeliers, even the champagne flutes. Ayana looked around and whispered, "So this is what too much money looks like when it forgets what warmth feels like." Nathaniel chuckled, handing her a glass of champagne. "Liquid courage. You'll need it more than me." No sooner had they stepped onto the parquet floor than the first familiar face appeared. Darling Melissa Worthington descended on them in a cloud of perfume and diamonds. "Nathaniel, we weren't sure you'd come. How brave of you." Her gaze slid to Ayana, curious, cold, calculating. "This is Ayana Brooks," Nathaniel said, placing a hand at the small of Ayana's back. "My girlfriend." Girlfriend, Melissa echoed as if tasting the word. "How wonderful. And what do you do, dear?" Ayana opened her mouth to answer, but Nathaniel beat her to it. "She's an educator, brilliant with children." "Charming," Melissa said clearly, unimpressed. "Lovely to meet you, Ariana." "It's Ayana," she corrected, but Melissa was already sashaying away. That, Nathaniel said quietly, was just the beginning. Ayana took a sip of champagne and surveyed the room. "You know what I see? What do one woman they? People with more money than manners, and an ex who hasn't looked away from us since the ceremony ended." Nathaniel glanced over. Sure enough, Sloane stood across the room, glass in hand, watching them. Ayana gave him a sidelong glance, ready for Act 2. Before he could answer, Sloane appeared. She looked flawless, her hand curled around Gregory's arm. He smiled blandly while Sloane offered a practiced expression of warmth. "Nathaniel," she said smoothly. "So glad you could make it." He nodded. "Congratulations, you both look coordinated." Sloane's smile tightened. "And this must be your date." "Ayana Brooks," Ayana said, offering her hand. Sloane barely touched it. "Lovely. I don't believe I've heard of you before." "We've been keeping things private," Ayana replied, her voice honey smooth. "Nathaniel values his personal life, especially after, well, you know." Sloane's smile cracked just slightly. Gregory cleared his throat. "Well, we mustn't monopolize," Sloane said, eyes still fixed on Ayana. "Enjoy yourselves." As they walked away, Nathaniel exhaled hard. "You were incredible," he whispered. Ayana's eyes sparkled. "You're not the only one who can put on a show." He chuckled, but something inside him shifted, because it didn't feel like a show anymore. Not completely. The reception unfurled like a well-rehearsed play, every moment choreographed for elegance, excess, and shallow impressions. Strings played softly in one corner of the ballroom, while waiters moved like shadows between clusters of guests holding flutes of vintage champagne and laughing in tones far too rehearsed to be spontaneous. Ayanna felt like she had walked into a curated museum of wealth. She moved beside Nathaniel with poise, every glance carefully measured, every smile deliberate. But she didn't shrink under scrutiny, she leaned into it. She made eye contact, returned cold glances with subtle defiance, and carried herself as though she had every right to be there. Because she did. Nathaniel watched her in quiet awe. She wasn't just surviving the evening, she was commanding it. At one point, they paused near a high-top table to sip their drinks. A woman in a silver gown across the room stared with open curiosity. Her gaze shifted between Ayanna and Nathaniel, like she was scanning the incongruity between them, trying to make sense of what didn't fit. "That woman across from us hasn't stopped staring," Ayanna said under her breath. Nathaniel followed her gaze. Victoria Hamilton, Sloane's oldest friend, and the biggest gossip in Manhattan. "She's trying to decide if I'm a gold digger or a publicity stunt," Ayanna muttered, taking another sip. "Maybe both. Let her wonder." Ayanna turned to him, her tone light. "You care more than you pretend to." Nathaniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he gently brushed a non-existent crumb from the corner of her mouth. "Let's give Victoria something to talk about." She blinked. Then slowly a smile curled her lips. "You're learning." Victoria's eyes narrowed across the room as she leaned toward her husband and whispered behind her glass. Nathaniel chuckled softly. "You know what I'd say right now if this were real?" Ayanna asked. "What?" "I'd complain that we just had 3 courses and I'm still hungry." Nathaniel smiled. "We'll get pizza after this. You pick the toppings." "Deal." The ease between them caught him off guard. What started as scripted chemistry was now something more organic. He found himself forgetting to measure his words to stay in character. With Ayanna, he didn't have to calculate, he could just be. Dinner was announced and the guests moved to the dining area. Nathaniel and Ayanna were seated at a table with several of his acquaintances, investors, venture capitalists, and a tech CEO whose name Ayanna vaguely remembered from a business magazine. The woman seated directly across from them, adorned in pearls and icy perfume, barely acknowledged Ayanna. But she kept stealing glances. Her curiosity was a mask poorly hiding judgment. Ayanna leaned closer to Nathaniel and whispered, "This woman's dissecting me with her eyes. If she had a microscope, she'd already be under my skin." "That's Victoria's mother," he replied, "which makes sense." Ayanna arched a brow. "The judgment is hereditary then." He laughed, not because he had to, but because he couldn't help it. "You're handling all of this better than I expected," he said. "I've worked customer service for years, rich people with complaints. This is Tuesday." He looked at her with something more than amusement. There was respect in his gaze, admiration even. She saw it, but she said nothing. The first course arrived, delicate and overly complicated. Between soup and salad, small talk flowed stiffly around the table, circling market forecasts, private schools, and exclusive vacation homes. Ayanna played her part without blinking, nodding politely, occasionally chiming in with just enough detail to keep herself mysterious. Then came the moment Nathaniel had quietly dreaded. Sloane and Gregory arrived at their table. "Mind if we greet the guests properly?" Sloane said, placing a hand on Nathaniel's shoulder, with just a touch too much familiarity. Gregory gave a politician's smile and offered a brief nod. "Nathaniel, always a pleasure." Nathaniel stood instinctively, placing a protective hand on the back of Ayanna's chair. "Sloane, Gregory, you remember Ayanna." Of course, Sloane said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Her gaze flicked over Ayanna's dress jewelry and posture. "Lovely to see you again." Ayanna stood and extended a hand. "Congratulations." The ceremony was beautiful. "Thank you," Sloane said. "You know Nathaniel never mentioned you before, but I suppose privacy is more valuable than ever." Ayanna smiled serenely. "Some things are too good to advertise." Gregory cleared his throat. "We should let them enjoy their meal. Still a few tables left." As they walked away, Sloane's glance over her shoulder lingered too long. Ayanna sat slowly, eyes thoughtful. "She's not over you," she said. Nathaniel shook his head. "She left. For someone else." "I didn't say she didn't leave. I said she's not over you." "What gave it away?" "The way she looked at me. Like she wanted to hate me, but couldn't justify it." Nathaniel blinked. "I didn't even notice." "You were too busy trying to keep your expression neutral." He chuckled. "You're good at this." Ayanna's tone softened. "I've spent a long time walking into rooms like this pretending not to notice who doesn't want me there. It's survival. You learn to wear masks. Do you always have to wear one?" She looked at him. Only around people who can't see me for who I am. Nathaniel's throat tightened. What about me? Ayanna didn't answer immediately. Then you're trying. I'll give you that. Dancing followed dinner. Gregory and Sloane took the floor first, swaying to a soft romantic ballad. One by one, other couples joined them. Nathaniel hesitated. Ayanna looked up at him. Shall we? I should warn you, I'm no ballroom expert. Just follow my lead. He stood and extended his hand. She took it without hesitation. As they moved onto the floor, he slipped one arm around her waist and took her other hand in his. She fit there too easily, too comfortably. I thought you said you weren't great at this, he murmured. I never said I wasn't secretly amazing, she replied. He smiled. Their bodies moved in sync, the music lulling the lights warm and golden. For a moment, nothing else existed. No Sloane, no guess, no fabricated backstory. Just the rhythm, her breath, his hand on her back. She's watching us, Ayanna whispered. Let her. The music slowed. The couples around them pressed closer. Ayanna's arm slid up around Nathaniel's neck, and he responded by holding her more firmly, more protectively. Is this okay? He asked quietly. More than okay, she said. Their eyes met. For a brief second, they hovered in that charged space between performance and something unscripted. Nathaniel forgot about revenge. Ayanna forgot about the money. They simply existed. Together. The music shifted, something slower now, something softer than the elegant waltz before. Around them, couples moved in closer arms, wrapping tighter heads, leaning into shoulders. The mood had changed, and Nathaniel felt it instantly. This wasn't a show anymore. Not for anyone watching. This was a private moment in the middle of a crowded room. Ayanna looked up at him, her expression unreadable. Her arms were still around his neck, her fingers resting lightly on the fine fabric of his jacket. Nathaniel's hands remained at her waist, steady and warm. Neither moved to break the contact. I didn't expect this, he said quietly. She tilted her head. Expect what? To feel like this. Like I don't want this to end. Ayanna's lips curved, not a full smile, just a quiet acknowledgement of shared awareness. Funny, she said. I was just thinking the same thing. The moment stretched between them. He wanted to ask what it meant, whether they were still pretending, or if they had crossed a line neither of them could walk back from. But he didn't. He couldn't. Because whatever it was, whatever this was, it felt fragile and real all at once. Instead, Nathaniel pulled her just a little closer. Ayanna didn't resist. Her head rested lightly against his chest as they swayed, and for the first time that night, Nathaniel stopped noticing the glances, the judgment, the expectation. All he could hear was the music and the sound of her breathing. All he could feel was the warmth of her body pressed gently against his. He had brought her here to send a message. But the only message echoing in his mind now was a question. What if none of this is fake anymore? A groomsman half drunk and grinning stumbled into them and mumbled a clumsy apology before veering toward the open bar. The moment broke. Ayanna pulled back, slightly blinking as if waking from a dream. Fresh air, she said. I could use some. Nathaniel nodded. Come on. They slipped out onto the terrace where a few guests had wandered to escape the heat and the chatter. The night air was crisp and cool, a welcome contrast to the ballroom's heavy perfume of roses, champagne, and expectation. Ayanna leaned against the stone railing, letting the breeze play with the edges of her dress. She exhaled slowly, her arms folding loosely in front of her. That was intense, she said. He joined her, standing beside her but not touching. Yeah, it was. Do you always dance like that with fake girlfriends? Nathaniel looked over at her. That didn't feel fake. No, she admitted it didn't. A silence settled between them, not awkward, but thick with meaning. Nathaniel reached into his pocket, suddenly remembering the earrings. He hesitated. Hey, he said, I have something for you. Ayanna gave him a wary look. If it's another high-priced accessory, I'm going to scold you. He pulled out the velvet box and held it out. Too late, but hear me out. She opened it, revealing the diamond drop earrings, simple, elegant, and breathtaking. Nathaniel, I asked the stylist to bring jewelry options, and these just reminded me of you. Ayanna turned toward him slowly, eyes softening. You keep doing that. Doing what? Making it hard to remember this is temporary. Before he could answer, the terrace doors opened, and a familiar voice called his name. He turned. Sloane. She stepped out alone, the hem of her dress trailing behind her like a bridal ghost. Her expression was composed, but her eyes carried something else. Something unfinished. There you are, she said, her tone overly bright. I've been looking for you. Ayanna stiffened. Nathaniel felt it immediately. Sloane walked toward them with quiet confidence, her heels clicking softly on the stone. I was hoping to steal you for a dance, she said, glancing at Ayanna. For old time's sake. Nathaniel blinked. It's your wedding night. Sloan, he said carefully, I don't think that's appropriate. Sloan waved a dismissive hand. Charles won't mind. He's charming guest. Her eyes returned to Ayanna. You don't mind, do you? Ayanna's expression didn't shift. I'm not his keeper. Before anyone could stop her, Sloan had already slipped her hand through Nathaniel's arm and was leading him back inside. He looked over his shoulder once at Ayanna, standing motionless on the terrace, unreadable. It was the only moment that night he truly regretted. Inside, Sloan guided him to the dance floor, just as another slow song began. She stepped into his arms with ease as if no time had passed, as if their history wasn't buried beneath years of miscommunication and carefully stacked resentment. I'm glad you came, she said softly. I didn't think you would. I almost didn't. But you did, and with a surprising date. Nathaniel said nothing. She's very different from your usual type. He raised an eyebrow. Maybe that's why it's working. Sloane's laugh was light. Is it working? He didn't answer. You seem happy, she said. I am. It was only partially a lie. And you, he asked. I have everything I ever said I wanted, Sloane replied. Nathaniel studied her face. That's not an answer. She looked away. I wanted stability, she said. Security. Charles is everything I asked for on paper. But not everything you want. Passion isn't everything, Nathaniel. No, he agreed. But it matters. So does truth. She blinked. Are you saying I lied? I'm saying you weren't honest with yourself. Neither of us were. The song neared its end. Sloane didn't move. She seems genuine, Sloane said finally. Ayanna. She is. Don't let her go, she said quietly. Someone who sees the real you and stays. That's rare. Nathaniel nodded. I know. When he returned to the terrace, Ayanna was gone. He found her back at their table sipping water and speaking politely to an elderly man, Charles's grandfather, if Nathaniel remembered correctly. She looked up as he approached, her expression calm. How was the dance, she asked evenly. Enlightening, he said. I bet. He sat down beside her. I think I finally understand why Sloane left, he said. Why? Because we brought out the worst in each other. Ayanna looked at him for a long time. That's surprisingly honest. I'm learning. Good. A beat passed. Nathaniel turned toward her fully. What about you? What about me? This night, us. Did we fool them? Ayanna smiled softly. I think we fooled everyone. And ourselves. Her smile faded into something more serious. That dance wasn't pretend, Nathaniel. No, it wasn't. He reached for her hand beneath the table. She didn't pull away. And for the first time since Sloane's invitation arrived, he didn't feel like a man trying to win something back. He felt like a man discovering something new, something real standing right in front of him. The ride home from the wedding was quiet. Ayanna stared out the window of the black town car, the city lights flickering across her face like ghosts of things unspoken. Nathaniel sat beside her, still in his tux, hands folded in his lap, unsure of whether to speak or sit in silence. There had been a moment on the dance floor, a real moment, the kind that shifted air and rewrote boundaries. But then Sloane appeared, and though the dance between Nathaniel and his ex had lasted only minutes, it had reopened something. Not in Nathaniel, in Ayanna. And now they sat next to each other like passengers on different flights, still moving in the same direction, but with too much distance between them. Finally, Nathaniel spoke. I didn't want to dance with her. Ayanna didn't turn. But you did. She cornered me. You saw it. That's not the point. He frowned. Then what is? She turned to him slowly, her voice calm but deliberate. The point is that this whole thing, this arrangement, was supposed to be a game, a performance. But it stopped feeling like one. And for a second, I thought maybe you felt the same. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. I did. Then why did it look like the part of you that still belongs to her showed up the second she asked? He let out a sharp breath, frustrated not with her, but with himself. Because I spent years building a life around her. That kind of foundation doesn't crumble cleanly. But I didn't enjoy it. I didn't want it. I didn't feel anything except regret. Ayanna looked away again. Doesn't make it easier to watch. No, he admitted, it doesn't. The silence returned heavier now. When the car finally pulled up in front of her apartment, Ayanna opened the door before the driver could get to it. Nathaniel followed Ayanna. She paused on the curb, the city humming around her. She looked tired, not physically, but emotionally. The kind of tired that comes from putting armor back on after daring to take it off. You're not a bad man, Nathaniel, she said. But you're used to people orbiting around you. Used to getting what you want because you can afford to. I don't work like that. I know, he said softly. That's what I admire about you. She gave him a sad smile. Then let me leave on my terms. He nodded, stepping back. As she disappeared into the building, Nathaniel stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, hands in his pockets, the weight of something precious slipping through his fingers. He'd gone into this arrangement trying to prove a point. Now the only point that mattered was that somewhere along the way, the arrangement had turned into something else, and he was in danger of losing it before he'd ever fully grasped what it could be. The next day was overcast. Manhattan's skyline blurred slightly with the drizzle coming in from the river. Nathaniel sat at his desk in his high-rise office, staring at a proposal draft he hadn't read. His assistant had buzzed 3 times. He hadn't answered once. His phone vibrated. Unknown number. Your girl's not doing great. Thought you should know. D. Nathaniel blinked. D. It took him a second to remember the loud protective best friend Ayanna had mentioned in passing. He typed back, "Is she okay?" The reply came fast. "No, but she will be. Just not with mixed signals from tuxedoed ghosts." Nathaniel sighed. He'd spent so much of his life managing public perception, controlling outcomes. But this wasn't a contract. This wasn't a press release. This was a person. Someone who had stood by his side through a lion's den of scrutiny, held his hand and danced with him like the world was silent. And he'd let her walk away without telling her the truth. That night, Nathaniel took the subway. No limo, no driver, no excuses. He climbed the steps to Ayanna's building, rain clinging to his coat, and buzzed her apartment. No answer. He buzzed again, still nothing. Just as he was turning to leave, the door opened. It wasn't Ayanna, it was her neighbor, an older woman balancing groceries. "You look like a man who's either here to apologize or ruin someone's night," she said bluntly. "Apologize," Nathaniel replied without hesitation. She nodded toward the stairs. "Second floor, 2B. If she yells, pretend I didn't let you in." He gave a grateful nod and took the stairs 2 at a time. When he reached the door, he hesitated. Then he knocked. A few seconds later, the door creaked open. Ayanna stood there in a hoodie and leggings, barefoot, her eyes tired and cautious. "I wasn't expecting you," she said. "I know. I came anyway." Silence. "Then you're wet." "I earned it." She stepped back, letting him in. The apartment was small, cozy. Books stacked in corners. A candle burned low on the coffee table. Music played quietly in the background. Etta James. He stood awkwardly in the center of the room while she crossed her arms. "I just came to say something I should have said last night," he said. Ayanna watched him. "I danced with her because I didn't know how to say no without creating a scene. But I hated every second of it. Because all I wanted to do was be next to you." "You didn't have to say yes," she replied. "I know. I panicked. I reverted. But I don't want to keep reverting, not with you." Ayanna didn't move. Nathaniel stepped closer. "You weren't part of the plan," he said. "You were the contract, the deal. But somewhere along the way, you became the only real thing in it. And if you walk away now, I'll have earned that. But I needed you to know I'm not pretending anymore." Her jaw tightened. "Do you even know what you're asking for?" "Yes, I'm asking for another chance. No shows, no revenge, no pretending." Ayanna looked down at the floor, then slowly back up. "You hurt me," she said quietly. "I know. You let me feel like I was just another pawn in some fancy narrative you were writing for your ex. I did, and I'm sorry." She stepped closer now, her voice still low. "You want real? Then understand this. I'm not someone you just impress with apologies and jewelry. I need more than that." He nodded. "Then tell me what you need." She studied him. "I need consistency. I need to know that when you say I matter, I won't see you hesitate the minute someone from your past walks in. I need a man who's not just proud to stand next to me when people are watching, but when they're not." Nathaniel reached out and gently took her hand. "I want to be that man," he said. "And I'll prove it, as many times as you need." A long silence passed. Finally, Ayanna exhaled. "You better mean it," she said, her fingers curling into his. "Because I've never been someone's second choice. And I'm not about to start now." He nodded, pulling her into a quiet, slow embrace. Her head rested against his shoulder, and for the first time since the wedding, the silence between them was healing, not haunting. And in that small apartment with Etta James crooning in the background, resilience didn't look like a speech or a grand gesture. It looked like 2 people scarred and trying, choosing each other slowly, deliberately, honestly. The morning light filtered through Ayanna's small kitchen window, casting soft golden lines across the worn hardwood floor. Nathaniel stood barefoot in front of the stove sleeves, rolled up clumsily, flipping a pancake with a concentration that could have rivaled any boardroom negotiation. Batter sizzled as it hit the pan, a quiet rhythm in the background of a still new comfort. From behind him, Ayanna leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed and eyes amused. "You're going to burn that if you keep flipping it like it owes you money." Nathaniel looked over his shoulder, grinning. I'm used to aggressive takeovers, not delicate breakfast maneuvers. She chuckled, walking over to rescue the now slightly crisp pancake. You want to impress me? Learn to fold laundry without shrinking everything. I consider that an investment strategy. Buy small, let it expand. Ayana rolled her eyes but smiled despite herself. There was a strange sweetness to seeing him here, messy-haired, slightly lost in a domestic task and completely unguarded. He didn't belong in this kitchen, not really. Not with its mismatched dishes and humming refrigerator. But something about him made her small apartment feel more lived and more whole. And the fact that he wanted to be there, not as part of a performance, but as himself, meant more than she'd let on. They sat across from each other at the tiny kitchen table. Ayana poured syrup while Nathaniel cut into his pancake with exaggerated seriousness. This might be the most fulfilling business deal I've ever made, he said after a bite. Glad to know my cooking now ranks with your billion-dollar mergers? Absolutely, except this one comes with sass and better coffee. She leaned back, watching him for a moment. You know this isn't just about apologies and pancakes, right? Nathaniel sobered a little. I know, it's about the long haul, the days that don't come with a spotlight, and the hard stuff, the awkward conversations, the times when I'll need space or when you'll need patience. He nodded. I'm not just here to win you over, Ayana. I'm here to stay. She studied him carefully. That means showing up every time. I will, he said. You're not a prize, you're a partner. It wasn't a grand gesture or an emotional outburst, but something in the quiet certainty of his voice sank into her. Deep. Over the next few weeks, things shifted in tangible ways. Nathaniel didn't just say he wanted a life with her, he showed it. He still wore suits, still held meetings in glass towers, but his phone rang a little less often during dinner. He rescheduled one of his weekly board briefings just to walk with Ayana to a community workshop she was hosting at the local rec center. At first, she was skeptical. Men like him didn't stay in places like hers unless they were slumming it for novelty. But Nathaniel wasn't just attending, he was engaging, listening, asking questions. When one of the older volunteers spilled paint on his shoes, he laughed. When a group of kids from the after-school program asked if he was Miss Ayana's boyfriend, he answered, I hope so, without hesitation. And Ayana noticed how he looked at the kids not as liabilities, not as problems, but as potential. Later that evening, while they sorted donated books, she turned to him. Why are you really here, Nathaniel? You don't need a tax write-off or a headline. He closed the box of paperbacks and looked at her. I'm here because I want to understand your world, the world you care about, and because I want to build something that has both of us in it. Her heart thudded quietly. She didn't say anything, just passed him another stack of books. But her fingers lingered against his for a moment longer than necessary. One weekend, they went apartment hunting. It wasn't official, just casual browsing, Nathaniel had said. But Ayana knew better. The way his hand curled possessively around hers when they stepped into each new place said it wasn't about the real estate. It was about planting roots. They toured a sunlit brownstone in Brooklyn with exposed brick and a rooftop garden. Ayana paused by the window, sunlight catching the softness in her expression. Nathaniel stepped beside her. You could teach yoga out there, she smirked, and you'd have space for your 12,000 ties. I'd trade them all for more mornings like this. Don't be dramatic, keep 5. He laughed, then grew quiet. I want us to have a space that's ours, he said. Not mine that you visit, not yours that I invade. Ayana turned to him. I'm not used to someone offering to build around me. Usually I'm expected to fit in. Then let's build something new, together. It was bold, a leap. But somehow standing in the golden afternoon light, with a breeze drifting through the window, and the world outside hushed, it didn't feel terrifying. It felt possible. Of course not everything was smooth. There were bumps, small, clumsy moments that reminded them they were from different orbits. One night, Nathaniel brought her to a black tie gala supporting an education foundation. She wore a deep green gown that made her look like a force of nature. But as soon as they arrived, she felt the sting of eyes on her. Curious, measuring. An older donor mistook her for event staff. Someone else assumed she was Nathaniel's assistant. Ayana swallowed it all with grace, but in the car ride home, she went quiet. I'm sorry, Nathaniel said. That was awful. She shook her head. It wasn't unexpected. But it's not acceptable. No, it's not, she agreed. But if I keep walking away from every place that makes me feel small, I'll never get to change it. Nathaniel reached for her hand. Then we walk in together. Always. She nodded, quietly moved. One morning, Ayana found a package outside her door. No note, just her name. Inside was a thick portfolio, beautifully bound, filled with plans. A community center. Her community center. Drafted by one of Manhattan's top architecture firms. Nathaniel had enlisted them, using her ideas scrap sketches she'd once shown him late at night over coffee and laughs. At the back of the binder was a sticky note. We're not just building a home. We're building something bigger. For you, for them, for us. She pressed the binder to her chest and exhaled. This wasn't about fairy tale endings. This was about legacy. That night, as they stood on the roof of her building, the city stretching endlessly around them, Nathaniel wrapped his arms around her from behind. You ever think he whispered that all the broken pieces before now were just clearing space? For what? For this. Ayanna leaned back against him. No, she said softly. I think those pieces were part of this. They made us ready. He kissed her temple. Together they watched the skyline, not as visitors to each other's lives, but as co-architects of something better, something that for once didn't need pretending. The call came in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. Nathaniel was standing outside a cafe near Union Square, a to-go cup in hand, waiting for Ayanna to meet him after her class. The sun was out, spring was in the air, and his heart felt light in the way it only did when he was with her or expecting her. He had already picked out a table with a view of the park where cherry blossoms were blooming like confetti caught midair. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. But something intuition instinct fate made him press answer. Mr. Calloway, the voice asked, clipped and efficient. Yes, front. This is Officer Landry, NYPD. I'm calling regarding Miss Ayanna Brooks. Nathaniel's stomach dropped. What happened to him? She's safe, the officer said quickly, as if trained to say it before anything else. But we need you to come to Lenox Hill Hospital as soon as possible. She asked for you. By the time Nathaniel arrived, the sky had shifted. The spring warmth now carried a chill, and the clouds seemed lower, heavier. The nurse at the front desk directed him to the 4th floor. Room 417. He knocked once before pushing the door open. Ayanna was sitting up in the hospital bed, an IV in her arm and a thin monitor clipped to her finger. She looked pale but alert. Her hair was slightly mussed and a small cut marked her temple. Her eyes lit up when she saw him, even if the rest of her body looked worn. I'm okay, she said quickly before he could say a word. I swear I'm okay. He walked to her side, gripping the bed rail, as if it were the only thing holding him upright. What happened that in Storn? I was walking from the rec center to the subway. Someone tried to grab my bag. I didn't let go fast enough. Got shoved into a fire hydrant. Nathaniel's knuckles whitened. They caught him, he asked. She nodded. Eventually. Some teenagers saw and called it in. I didn't lose anything except my dignity and apparently some balance. Nathaniel sank into the chair beside her. You should have called me sooner. I didn't want to scare you. I am scared. Ayanna looked away, blinking against something too heavy to name. I didn't realize how fast things could change, she murmured. 1 second I'm walking, thinking about what kind of muffins to bring to your office tomorrow, and the next I'm bleeding on the pavement. His voice was low. You don't have to do this alone anymore. I know, she said, but it's hard to shake the muscle memory. Nathaniel reached for her hand. I'm not going anywhere. Ayanna was discharged later that evening with minor injuries and a headache that bloomed behind her eyes. Nathaniel insisted she come home with him, not to the penthouse, not yet, but to the Brooklyn brownstone they had quietly begun renting together while planning renovations. She didn't argue. She was tired of pretending she didn't want to lean on someone. That night he tucked her into the couch, covered her with a fleece blanket, and made her tea like he'd done it 100 times. She watched him move through the kitchen with an ease that was almost domestic. But something in her had shifted. Pain didn't just bruise the body, it lingered in the mind. He handed her the cup, sat beside her, and waited. You keep looking at me like I'm made of glass, she finally said. I keep seeing you on that hospital bed, he replied. I can't shake it. I can't either. Silence stretched between them, not cold, just fragile. Then Ayanna added, this us was finally starting to feel solid. And then one random act pulls the rug out. Makes you question if the universe is waiting for you to get comfortable just so it can yank everything away. Nathaniel put his arm around her shoulder gently. We can't control the universe, but we can hold on to each other tighter when it tries. She rested her head on his chest, letting his heartbeat replace the chaotic thoughts in her head. You really believe that? I do now. The days that followed were a blur of healing and small gestures. Ayanna moved slower. Nathaniel stayed closer. He cooked. She let him. He canceled meetings. She told him not to, but he ignored her. Friends came by. Dee brought soup and sarcasm. A few of Ayanna's former students sent cards, one hilariously decorated with a glittery superhero cape and the words, "Get well, miss," a You're stronger than Thor. Nathaniel hung it on the fridge, but beneath the healing, a quiet thread of tension remained. Not between them, but inside Ayanna. One night as they lay on the couch watching an old movie, she sat up suddenly. I've been thinking about leaving the city. Nathaniel turned off the TV. What? Not permanently. Just, I don't know. Someplace quieter. Somewhere I don't have to look over my shoulder every night. He studied her face. This isn't like you. I didn't used to flinch when someone walked behind me on the sidewalk either. He took her hand. So we take a break, a trip, wherever you want. You'd leave everything. I'd leave anything. Her eyes shimmered. I don't want to run, she whispered. But I want to feel safe. I want us to grow somewhere the world doesn't always feel like a battlefield. Nathaniel paused, then nodded. I'll start looking at listings in Hudson Valley. A few days just us. She leaned into him again. You'd really do that. I'd build you a house with my own hands if it meant you could breathe easier. Ayanna exhaled a laugh. You'd hire 12 contractors and supervise with a latte. Same result, he said with a smirk. That weekend they drove north. Winding roads, trees, open skies. A rented cottage by a lake. For the first time in weeks, Ayanna slept through the night. And Nathaniel, lying beside her in the quiet dark, realized something terrifying and simple. He was in love with her. Not for what she represented. Not as part of a plan. But fully, messily, permanently. On the last day, they walked by the lake at sunset. Ayanna skipped a rock across the surface. Nathaniel watched her, memorizing the way the light danced on her profile. I'm not scared anymore, she said without looking at him. That's good, he said. I mean, I still have fears, but I'm not scared of this. She turned to him. I want to build with you, not just homes or projects. A life. I want the loud parts, the boring parts, the hard parts, all of it. Nathaniel stepped toward her, pulled her into his arms. Then let's build it. She looked up at him, tears catching in her lashes. I love you. He breathed out like the words had finally freed him. I love you too. And in that moment, with the world quiet around them and no audience in sight, love stopped being an idea. It became a promise. One that had survived interruption. One that would endure. The scent of legal paper and expensive perfume clung to the marble corridors of the Manhattan courthouse. Nathaniel adjusted the cuffs of his suit fingers, trembling in a way he hadn't experienced in years. He was no stranger to these halls. He had walked them countless times in legal battles, merger disputes, and corporate negotiations. But today was different. Today wasn't about business. It was about something far more personal, the full and final closure of the chapter with Sloan. They had filed the necessary paperwork to finalize the distribution of their shared assets months ago. The divorce had been official for years, but threads had remained: tangled finances, dormant trust funds, and a joint foundation that still bore both their names. Sloan had always delayed those final steps. Today she had called the meeting herself, and Ayanna would be waiting outside. He had asked her not to come. She had responded by arriving early, dressed in calm resolve and a muted charcoal coat. She didn't need to speak. Her presence said everything. I trust you, but I also see everything now. Nathaniel entered the conference room where Sloan stood by the window, sipping coffee with the grace of someone raised in boardrooms and ballet studios. You look tired, she said, turning to face him. I feel fine. That's not the same. He sat down, resting the leather folder in front of him. Let's get to it. Straight to the point. She offered a cold smile. Still your brand. The attorneys entered and took their seats, beginning the procedural review. Numbers were read aloud. Signatures were exchanged. There was nothing dramatic, just the slow, dignified sound of one life detaching from another. Halfway through, Sloane's pen stilled. You love her, she said quietly. Everyone in the room froze. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. Yes. Sloan nodded once, then looked down at the document and continued signing. No breakdown, no theatrical walkout. Just that. A confirmation, a reckoning. When the final page was signed, Sloan stood and extended her hand. Goodbye, Nathaniel. He took it. Take care, Sloan. She left the room without looking back. And somehow that made it real. Outside, Ayanna stood near the pillars, watching the city move in cold gusts around her. When Nathaniel stepped out, she straightened, searching his expression for a sign. It's done, he said. She nodded. And no explosions, no damage control, just done. He reached for her hand. Thank you for coming. I needed to be here, she said, not to check on you, to mark the moment, for both of us. They walked down the steps together. No press followed, no whispers trailed them. Just the steady beat of two people walking away from the past side by side. Later that evening, Ayanna sat at their kitchen island scrolling through her emails while Nathaniel poured 2 glasses of red wine. The new apartment still smelled faintly of fresh paint and possibility. Half the furniture hadn't arrived. The bookshelves were bare. But the space already felt lived in because they were filling it together. "Tomorrow," Nathaniel said, handing her the glass, "we meet with the city council." Ayanna raised her brow. "Already?" "They moved it up. Said your proposal caught more attention than expected. Some donors are even offering to match funding." Ayanna blinked. "You're serious?" "I never joke about infrastructure." She laughed, setting her glass down. "I can't believe this is real." "You made it real," he said. "You helped." He leaned against the counter watching her. "I've been thinking." "Uh-oh." "No, seriously, I've been thinking about us, about how we got here." She looked at him cautiously. "Don't panic," he added with a smile. "I'm not about to make a big speech or drop to one knee yet." Ayanna chuckled, then sobered slightly. "But something's on your mind. I just want you to know everything before you felt performative, even when I didn't realize it. With you, I never had to perform." She swallowed. "Neither did I. Even when it scared us. Especially then." He stepped closer, reaching for her hand. "We're building something, Ayanna, and it won't always be easy, but I don't want a single day of it without you." "Then don't try to outrun the hard parts." "I won't." She nodded once. "Then we're good." The next day, the city council chamber buzzed with energy. Community leaders, local reporters, young activists, and skeptical officials filled the room. Ayanna stood at the podium, calm but grounded, as she presented their vision for the new Community Wellness Center, a space designed to offer resources, education, healthcare access, and mentorship for underserved youth. She didn't speak like someone selling a dream. She spoke like someone claiming it. By the end of her pitch, several attendees were wiping their eyes. Even the most rigid committee member had softened. Nathaniel, watching from the back, felt something unexpected. Pride, yes, but also awe, because Ayanna wasn't just someone he loved. She was a force, and he was lucky just to walk in her orbit. After the presentation, they stepped out into the hallway, where city representatives approached them with questions, offers, and invitations to follow-up meetings. They were building something, not out of vengeance, not from ruins, but from vision. Together, that night they returned home late, exhausted but buzzing. They curled on the couch, shoes off, suits, wrinkled wine untouched. Ayanna laid her head on his chest. "We did it. You did it." "We did it," she repeated, eyes closing. In the quiet, Nathaniel whispered, "Next week, I'm taking you somewhere." She opened one eye. "Where?" "Somewhere we can breathe. Just us. No headlines, no city planning. A getaway. A reset. A reminder of what matters." She smiled sleepily. "You're starting to sound like someone who believes in forever." "I think I always have," he said softly. "I just didn't know what it looked like until you." It wasn't the kind of wedding that made headlines. There were no gold-plated invitations, no aerial drones capturing vineyard panoramas, no designer gowns under embargo until Vogue's exclusive drop. But what Ayanna and Nathaniel had was infinitely rarer. They had clarity. They had choice. They had each other, unpolished and unpretending, and they had decided that was enough. The ceremony took place in the courtyard of the community center, their community center, which stood proudly in the middle of the neighborhood where Ayanna had first taught yoga in borrowed church basements. The bricks were still fresh, the mural still curing, but the space already buzzed with stories with futures. Just after noon, the guests arrived, students, neighbors, mentors, and Nathaniel's college roommate turned investment banker, Ayanna's cousin from Baltimore, who ran a soul food truck, and Dee, of course, dressed like a sermon and a riot. There was no aisle lined with orchids, just chairs set up in rows under paper lanterns. A string quartet played on a makeshift stage built by local volunteers, most of whom couldn't read sheet music, but could feel rhythm in their bones. Ayanna stood inside the center's art room, where kids had spent the past week painting "Good Luck Miss A" banners in crooked lettering. She looked at her reflection in the smudged mirror. Her dress was ivory, not white, fitted but soft, simple, honest. Dee stood behind her, arms crossed, misty-eyed. "I've seen you in every stage of armor," she said, "but this is the first time you've looked like you don't need any." Ayanna turned, blinking back emotion. "I still feel scared." "That means it matters." They hugged long and quiet. No speeches, just breath and history. Outside, Nathaniel stood near the front, hands clasped loosely in front of him. He wore a navy suit, not black, not flashy, just clean, intentional. Beside him, the officiant, a retired professor of sociology who had once mentored Ayanna, shuffled index cards and smiled to himself. Then she appeared. Ayanna stepped into the courtyard lantern, swaying sunlight, bending around her like she was always meant to stand in open light. And Nathaniel forgot how to breathe. She met his eyes, and the distance between them felt like the final step across a very long bridge. When she reached him, he didn't take her hand right away. He looked at her, fully, silently. And in that moment, everyone faded away. The professor cleared his throat with theatrical ceremony. Friends, community, chosen family, we are gathered not to start something new, but to mark what has already begun. He smiled at Ayana. This woman taught me 30 years ago that resistance can be quiet, that justice isn't always thunder, it's sometimes just showing up again and again. He turned to Nathaniel. And this man has taught me that privilege, when wielded with humility, can be a bridge, not a wall. The ceremony was short. They exchanged vows they wrote themselves. Ayana spoke first. I didn't grow up dreaming of a wedding. I grew up learning how to build walls strong enough to survive alone. But then you showed up, and you didn't try to climb over those walls. You asked to help reinforce them, and then you helped me see when I didn't need them anymore. Nathaniel's voice was thick when he responded. I was trained to lead, to negotiate, to control, but I had no idea how to listen. You taught me. You never asked to be rescued. You never needed a savior, and yet you saved me. Not from the world, but from myself. They placed rings on each other's fingers. No doves flew, no champagne towers glittered, but as they kissed soft and certain, someone's grandma clapped so loudly it made the front row jump. Ayana laughed into Nathaniel's shoulder, and the guests exploded into joy. The courtyard filled with music, dancing, clapping. Someone started a line dance. Someone else pulled out a speaker and played Marvin Gaye. A kid from the literacy program did cartwheels in the middle of the floor. It was perfect chaos. It was theirs. Siwonwan Xiangpon. Later that night, long after the guests had left and the lights had dimmed, Ayana and Nathaniel returned to the empty community center. Their shoes were off, ties, loosened hair undone. They walked through the hallways hand in hand. Do you realize Nathaniel said we got married where most people come to ask for help? Ayana looked around at the quiet space. Exactly. That's what made it sacred. They stepped into the yoga room, which still smelled faintly of incense and new wood floors. Ayana moved to the center barefoot on the mat. Dance with me, she whispered. No music played. They swayed anyway, slowly, tenderly. Their foreheads touched. This is the kind of love I didn't think existed, Ayana murmured. Nathaniel kissed her temple. This is the kind of life I didn't know I needed. The mural outside the center's front door glowed under the streetlight, two hands reaching toward each other, not for rescue, but for strength. Beneath it, a quote Ayana had chosen months ago now read like prophecy. We don't need to complete each other. We only need to meet fully, truthfully, and build. They had built, and tomorrow they would continue. Together. The house they chose wasn't grand. It sat on a quiet street in the Hudson Valley, hugged by trees that blushed gold in the fall and whispered with snow in the winter. The porch creaked when you stepped on it. The stairs tilted to slightly left, and the kitchen had cabinets that stuck just enough to remind you that this wasn't new construction. But Ayana loved it from the first time she walked through the front door and smelled cedar and coffee in the air. Nathaniel had only looked at her face to know this was it. This is the place she had whispered, her fingers grazing the windowsill like it held a pulse. And this was home. One, Surasurin. They moved in slowly. Boxes arrived in no particular order. Books were stacked before shelves were assembled. The bed was a mattress on the floor for 2 weeks, and the internet didn't work for nearly a month. But each inconvenience became a shared story, not a complaint. Nathaniel handled the light fixtures. Ayana painted the guest room a deep, earthy green. They argued over where the record player should go. She won, and which couch to keep. They compromised. Sometimes they worked side by side in companionable silence. Nathaniel answering work emails, Ayana building lesson plans for the new wellness series. Other times they danced in the living room without music, twirling beneath fairy lights strung from ceiling beams. They still had the city apartment, still made visits for council meetings and check-ins with the community center. But up here in the woods, life took on a different rhythm. Slower, softer, less about proving, more about being. And Ayana noticed something in herself she hadn't felt in a long time. She was safe, not in a survival way, not in a just make it through way, but in a soul-deep, unclenched way. Her laugh had changed. It came faster now, lingered longer. One morning as the sun filtered in through linen curtains, she lay tangled in bed sheets watching Nathaniel snore gently beside her, his hand resting against her stomach. She reached for her phone and opened the Notes app. She wrote one-word piece. Kunadsurum. They built new routines. Saturdays were for hiking. Sundays were for pancakes and open window jazz. Wednesday nights meant bonfires in the backyard, where they toasted marshmallows too long and talked about the future. They adopted a dog, an old mutt named Booker, who had one ear that refused to stand straight and a snore that rivaled Nathaniel's. Ayanna insisted he had wise eyes. Nathaniel claimed he had a con man's appetite. Both were right. Their friends visited often. Dee brought too much wine and left laughter echoing in the walls for days. The kids from the community center wrote letters sometimes, sending drawings of the center with speech bubbles. This place changed me. Sometimes Ayanna and Nathaniel would sit on the back deck, mugs in hand, and talk about the years behind them, the painful ones, the beautiful ones. They didn't try to forget the struggles. They honored them. Those years hadn't just led them here, they had shaped them. And more than once, Ayanna had said, "I don't ever want to stop growing. Not with you." And Nathaniel had replied, "Then we won't." One afternoon, Ayanna walked through the garden, fingers trailing the leaves of tomato plants and basil stems. Booker patted behind her tail, wagging like a metronome. She paused near the back fence, staring at the small patch of wildflowers that had sprung up without invitation. Purple, yellow, and white, imperfect, unsymmetrical. Beautiful. Nathaniel appeared a few steps behind a letter in his hand. "You got something," he said, holding it out. She took it and opened it slowly. Inside was a city seal and a gold embossed letter. The community center had been awarded permanent funding status from the Department of Civic Development. It was now considered a pillar institution. Ayanna blinked at the words, lips parting. Nathaniel watched her, his eyes soft. "You built something that's going to outlive both of us," he said. "No," she replied, "we did." And then she folded the letter, placed it in her pocket, and returned her gaze to the flowers. 40 surmountamun. Months passed, then a year. They celebrated anniversaries with takeout on the porch and long kisses that tasted like rain. They hosted neighborhood dinners, attended town council meetings, and planted fruit trees they may never see bear fruit, but that was the point. They weren't in a rush anymore. They were rooted. One evening during a storm, the power went out. Nathaniel lit candles while Ayanna pulled out blankets and an old radio powered by hand crank. They curled up on the couch, thunder rolling in the distance. "You ever think about what you would have done if we hadn't crossed paths again?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I think I'd still be living a good life," he said, "but I wouldn't have known it was missing something." "And now?" Simon. He looked at her. "I can't imagine any version of my life without you in it." She leaned her head on his shoulder. Good answer. The storm passed, the lights returned. But they didn't get up. They stayed in that bubble of candlelight and warmth, wrapped in the silence of people who no longer needed to prove anything. Poinmard Key. On the second anniversary of the center's opening, Ina stood at the podium in the same courtyard where she'd once said her vows. The mural behind her had faded slightly from weather, but the hands reaching for each other still held their shape. She glanced down at her speech, then looked up at the crowd, parents, students, city officials, neighbors. Nathaniel stood near the back, Booker asleep at his feet. Ayanna smiled. "I used to think the goal was to survive," she said, "to get through life with as few scars as possible. But now I understand something else. The goal isn't survival, it's connection. It's love. It's home. And not the kind of home made of bricks, but the kind made of people, of belonging." Applause rippled through the crowd. Ayanna stepped back, and Nathaniel came forward, wrapping his arm around her waist as the city presented her with a Civic Leadership Award. They didn't need plaques or titles, but it was nice sometimes to be seen. Mahiti. That night they walked barefoot through their garden, stars glittering above them, the air soft and still. Ayanna stopped, turning to face Nathaniel. "We made it." He pulled her close. "No, we're making it. Every day." She nodded, resting her forehead against his. "Then let's keep going." And in the stillness in the garden, where roots grew quietly beneath the earth and wildflowers bloomed without asking permission, they kissed. Not as escape, not as apology, but as a celebration of building, of believing, of finally being home.